Hello, hello, grasshoppers. This is doing this video Friday morning, actually, before classes start, before I actually have you guys in second hour. And today is about the war in 1863, really. 1862, 63, you know, as things get worse for the Union Army. Okay, you saw the title of the module is the battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, both of which are going to be losses for the Union Army. And again, it calls into mind what I've been trying to teach you guys, that Lincoln can't find a commander to get this done. Okay, George McClellan was terrible, right? But that doesn't mean that after McClellan gets fired, the failure of Antietam, that there's anybody there to that's any better to prosecute the war effort, especially for the Army of the Potomac, which is the one where everybody's eyes are on. Okay, so let me screen share and get this thing rolling. Okay, so here's the module. Okay, and you can see I got up here the purpose of, you know, the first thing to talk about is how the Emancipation Proclamation did and did not change the war situation. This is something you're going to want to take notes on for sure. Hold on, my coffee's over here. Okay, so please take note of this. You should have learned by now, you saw the video the other day, that a byproduct of the Battle of Antietam is that Abraham Lincoln is going to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, okay? And, you know, there's a lot of myth around the Emancipation Proclamation. It's definitely this kind of romantic moment, romanticized moment where, you know, Lincoln frees the slaves kind of a thing. We really need to look at the political realities of that. I mean, you should have learned the other day that Lincoln had been sitting with this idea of an emancipation of the slaves to deprive, you know, the South of their labor source for a while now, but he needed a Union victory. And there just was none to be found. I mean, the one out in Shiloh that Grant gets is, and Tecumseh Sherman, those two guys get, that's a good victory, but it's not where everybody's looking, okay? Like everybody's looking at Virginia. That's where the eyes of the nation is focused. And so you really need a victory in Virginia, or at least in the vicinity of Virginia. And when Antietam happens in 1862, it is a victory, even though it's not a victory. Like Lincoln wanted a destruction of Lee's army. Like he rightly understands that the only way the Confederacy can surrender is if you destroy their army. Okay. And so that attempted invasion of Maryland by Robert E. Lee in 1862, let me bring up the whiteboard for you guys for a second. The attempted invasion of Maryland that resulted in the Battle of Antietam does result in a loss for the South, right? Like they withdraw back into the South. However, George McClellan, being the stooge of a general that he is, does not follow up and destroy Lee's army when he had the advantage. He lets Lee and the Confederates slip back away into the South. And Lincoln loses his mind over this. He's like, I wanted you to destroy them. So he fires McClellan this time, finally for the last time. However, like they said in the film the other day, people in the North reading their newspapers are like, oh, the Confederates withdrew. That's a victory. And so after Antietam, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. It's a lot to type. I didn't even do it right, man. Sorry. Okay. So what did the Emancipation Proclamation do? I think that, you know, first of all, it frees all slaves in the rebelling territories, okay? But there's a problem with that, okay? Think about it, grasshoppers. Thing number one, just because Lincoln says the slaves are free now in the Confederate states that are rebelling against the nation, does that just mean that Southern states are going to just let all of their enslaved people go now? Like in Mississippi, or they'd be like, oh yeah, President Lincoln says you're good now. So everybody, you know, good luck. You can leave the plantation out. Like, is that going to happen? Of course not. So Southerners are going to ignore the Emancipation Proclamation. And the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to states in rebellion. Well, the border states where slavery is legal, like Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland, it doesn't apply to them because they are not in a state of rebellion. And that was done on purpose because Lincoln did not want to lose those states. So practically speaking, the Emancipation Proclamation doesn't free anybody. I mean, there are slaves that are emboldened to leave now because they hear about this thing, but practically speaking, it doesn't really free many enslaved people at all, okay? So then the question is, what does it accomplish? Well, it now gives the North the cause. Back when we started all this, I told you that when the Civil War begins, Southerners have the advantage of the cause because they're fighting for their freedom, right? Now the cause is to the North because Southerners claim they're fighting for freedom, but now it's very obvious that this war is about slavery. It is to end slavery forever, okay? And this was a brilliant move by a very smart politician in Abraham Lincoln, okay? We are going to make this about a noble cause now, and that's going to get a lot of support. In making the war about slavery, war is now about slavery, not just secession. It's still a war on secession, don't get me wrong, but now it's also a war on slavery. What does that do? That guarantees England cannot intervene. Okay, it's very important. You know, England has been kind of nosing around, like, I told you before, England had been talking to the South. They'd even made ships or weapons for the South to kind of help them out on the DL. But now England's got to stay. England is already emancipated, or outlawed slavery like a long time ago. So this means it's politically impossible for Britain to interfere on behalf of the South because they cannot support a nation that is fighting for slavery. It's a brilliant political move to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. But the other thing that the Emancipation Proclamation does is it sets the foundation for the 13th Amendment, which makes slavery illegal in the United States, okay? That amendment will not be passed till the war is just about over. There's a huge, huge legislative process to get the 13th Amendment passed. But that amendment will outlaw slavery, and this sets the groundwork for it, okay? Now you might ask, how did, I just realized I spelled Antietam wrong. God. See, these mornings. What gives Lincoln the right to do this, right? Under the Constitution, what gives him the right to just do this thing? Because the Constitution protects slavery, right? And we haven't passed the 13th Amendment yet. Lincoln justifies this action based on his status as commander-in-chief. This is a military necessity, right? As commander-in-chief of the military, depriving the South of a labor source like their slaves is a military necessity that will help you win the war. Okay, so it's an executive order basically as commander-in-chief. And enslaved people do start leaving plantations. Really what's going to happen is there's going to be this huge refugee crisis as Black Americans are caught between the Union Army, who doesn't want to take them in really yet, and Southern plantation owners who are trying to hunt them down. It's a really awful situation for Black Americans that's going to exist a couple of years while the Civil War still unfolds. Okay. Speaking of Civil War unfolding, let's take a look at the module again. All right. In 1862, in an attempt to pin down Lee's army in Virginia, again, this is where everybody's looking. Virginia, Virginia, Virginia. Yeah, it's great that Ulysses Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman are doing their thing out west, and they're successful. But all eyes are on Virginia, because remember, the prize is Richmond, okay? And also trying to pin down Lee's army and destroy it. So now the command of the Union Army passes to a guy named Ambrose Burnside, okay? And Ambrose Burnside is terrible. Like, to put it bluntly, he's terrible. He is the guy who sent his men across that bridge at Antietam that was just not very wide at all, and got many of them killed trying to cross a river that you could basically wade through. And he is elevated to command because Lincoln doesn't have anybody else. So now here he is at Fredericksburg. You know, side note about Ambrose Burnside. He was known for these this distinct style of wearing his beard, where he would have, you know, mutton chops that would do one of these, okay? And they came to be known as Burnsides, or excuse me, Burnsides and his sideburns, okay? And so here you go, like the sideburn is invented as a style, right? Glad you guys know that now, huh? But at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Burnside figures he's going to try and trap Lee. You know, Lincoln is on his case. Attack, attack, attack. You need to destroy this army. You need to end this war. You know, it's cold out. We're now on like December of 1862, right? And, you know, we need some good news, right, for the North. They've just been losing, except for Grant and Sherman out west. The North has been losing. I mean, even the Battle of Antietam, you know, was a Union victory, but it was really kind of a stalemate, right? So here's the attempt to pin down Lee's forces. Burnside, in his haste, right, feeling the heat from Washington, decides to attack an impossible position that the Confederates are in, okay? The Confederates are going to choose a position to their liking. Again, think all the way back to the beginning of this conflict when I talked about battle strategies. The South knows that they just have to play defense, and therefore they're going to go and sit on land that is to their advantage and make the Union or Northern armies come get them. It is exactly what happens in December of 1862 at Fredericksburg. Burnside's guys are arrayed over here, okay? You can see up here that Robert E. Lee's men are strung out on a ridge, okay? And it's kind of tough to tell from this map, but they're all up here on high ground. This is high ground with a slope that's kind of like this, okay? And what Robert E. Lee does is he positions his forces up here, and a good portion of them are either in a sunken road that they can use as a fire pit, or they're behind a stone wall that's about like chest high. Okay, you're gonna see this in the film clip that I embedded after, you know, when it's time to watch that. And what ends up happening is it's absurd to think about. Burnside orders his men to build pontoon bridges across this river here, the Rappahannock River, under fire, by the way, under sniper fire. And it's so difficult that he finally has to send a detachment across the river to clear out the snipers in the town of Fredericksburg itself, right? So that these bridges can be built to get the rest of the army across. Well, this all buys time for the Southerners to dig in behind their stone wall on a slope overlooking the town and get nice and snug and place their artillery up in here so their big guns can fire down into any advancing army with what is known as enfilading fire, meaning they can shoot into the sides of the Union troops as they march up the slope. It's brutal, right? So brutal. During the clearing out of this town, some of the Union troops start to commit arson and start looting the town. And it takes a little while for the Union Army to get control of these guys again, which adds to kind of the bad blood between the North and the South. You know, how dare you loot our, civilian houses, blah, blah, blah. But also slows them down because the officers got to get control of these guys, right? Like, get yourselves together. We got an attack to go, right? So by the time the Union Army emerges out of the town, they have to cross another stream, okay, and then attack up a slope that's like this against an enemy that's behind a stone wall, nicely like snug, who can fire downhill and have enfilading fire from artillery, okay? So these guys are going to march at that slope and get absolutely slaughtered. And then they're going to go up again and get slaughtered again. I believe that when Lee turns to Longstreet, which is one of his generals, you see him back here, and says, do you think this is a good position? And Longstreet is like, General, once we start firing, there won't be a chicken that can survive on that slope. And he was right. Like these men just get mowed down going up this slope. It's so brutal. Some of them get close to the wall. In this segment that you're going to see here from Gods and Generals, there was a particularly like kind of emotional moment in this battle where Irishmen who had joined the Southern side find themselves by just accidents, like bad luck, facing off directly against Irishmen for the Union Army coming up that slope. And they're forced to shoot at their own people, like their own, like these are all Irish immigrants fighting in this, and they're shooting at their own folk. And it's a really, really, really good scene that I put in here from Gods and Generals for you guys to watch. I'll let you know when to watch that, not quite yet. So a lot of these guys, they get kind of close. The Union Army gets kind of close to that stone wall, can't go any further. They have to retreat far enough back where they can use the slope to kind of protect themselves. Because remember, it's a slope like this from some of the gunfire coming at them. And then they lay down. And many of these guys are trapped on that slope overnight. And they expect that they're going to be able to slip away under cover of darkness. Well, by another just bad luck for the Union Army, just so happens that year, Aurora Borealis, the northern lights, which normally cannot be seen this far south in Virginia, were viewable in Virginia this year. And so while these guys lay down on the slopes, the Aurora Borealis lights up the night sky, and these guys are perfect silhouetted targets. And the Confederates up on that slope are able to pick them off, like, because they can see by the light that's been shed. And so they got to pile up bodies to like protect themselves. And these guys are trapped on that slope overnight. Okay. It's so brutal. Later on, other units are going to come up that slope the next day, and they're going to have to step over wounded men and things as they go, guys that are crying out for them to go back. Like, imagine you're one of these like rear guard units that has to make that same attack that people made the day before, but there are wounded guys on the ground bleeding out saying, go back, it's impossible, save yourselves. I mean, what kind of morale is that, right? And so you're trying to move up this slope. It's just ridiculous. And the whole battle ends up in a total loss for the Union Army, which has to retreat back across the river once again. South wins. Lincoln loses his mind. Ambrose Burnside is going to be fired from command for this snafu, right? It's just brutal. It was in effect suicide, as I put in your module here, right? It's basically suicide. So now I'm going to pause to give you a chance to watch this clip, okay, from Gods and Generals depicting this attack with the Irish firing at each other. Okay, so I'm going to pause right now and you guys watch that. Okay, you are now done watching that clip. You see what I mean? Very like compelling stuff, but very sad. Okay, very sad and like just I don't know what else to say about it. Just a brutal situation for all involved, particularly the Irish involved in that scenario going up that slope. Now, you've got the Battle of Chancellorsville follows in May of 1863. And now the commanding general of the Union Army is a guy by the name of Joseph Hooker. And you see him here. Okay. So Joseph Hooker, this is again in Virginia. I've been to this battlefield. Okay. I would love to go visit Fredericksburg, but I've been to Chancellorsville. And so that spring in 1863, again, under orders from Washington, D.C., find Lee's army, attack, 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 destroy it, destroy it, destroy it, right? Joseph Hooker is going to face off outside of the town of Chancellorsville, or really it's an area, where he's going to find himself against Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, okay? So the Union Army is now control of, is now under the command of Hooker. Side note on Joseph Hooker, he was known for being a hard drinker and an audacious kind of guy, but also the story goes that there were large amounts of prostitutes that would follow his men around, and when they would make camp for the night, right, these ladies would service the army, and they therefore came to be known as hookers, right? So that's how the story goes. Now you can go home, I guess, and tell your parents, hey, I learned what sideburns mean and where the term hookers comes from. Like, if you don't remember anything else, I'm sure they'll love that. But Joseph Hooker, he arraigns his men here, offsetting Robert E. Lee, and this map kind of doesn't show it real well, so I'm gonna go to I'm gonna do it this way, okay? So Hooker's guys are like aligned over here, and you've got Lee and Stonewall Jackson over here, okay? What ends up happening is, Hooker's got his men like spread out in a formation kind of like this, okay? Lee and Jackson have got their guys like this, and over here is a bunch of trees, okay? It's like a copse of woods, basically, okay? And this is where Stonewall Jackson's a genius when it comes to warfare. He really is. I told you about the commander advantage that the South has. What Jackson does is he does something that you're not supposed to do in warfare, right? He divides his force. Like Lee and Jackson are outnumbered, like they are always outnumbered by the Union Army. And Stonewall Jackson, what will happen is Lee will create a diversion here and make it look like he wants to fight in the center. So all Hooker's guys over here are engaged, okay, in this fight right here. While that fighting is going on, Stonewall Jackson's going to quietly move his men around these trees. And we're talking about a movement that takes all day. I mean, this movement starts like in the morning and it's not completed till like 5 p.m. or something like that, right? And these men like come around and they kind of set themselves up here. So when he sends word to Robert E. Lee that he's ready, Lee again renews the engagement. All of Hooker's men are here engaged. And then this contingent of Hooker's men, their right flank, they don't think the fighting's coming to them. So they start setting up for the night. They're like, they got their coffee out. They got their like food out. Some of them are not dressed right. They've got their uniforms off and they're just sitting there in their like undershirts and stuff. And like all of a sudden, Stonewall Jackson's men come bursting out of the woods here and totally surprise Hooker, into a battle formation like this. And they sweep the field. They just kind of plunge into Hooker's men there. And literally while guys are like drinking coffee, okay, routs them, right? Joseph Hooker himself doesn't even witness the operation and the rout because the house that he makes his headquarters in takes an artillery shell to the roof and it collapses and he's knocked unconscious. So like, this is again a rout, an absolute, like the Union Army is just swept from the field, right? They're going to come this direction and boom, slam into Hooker's men, just driving them off the field. And it's just like really, really ridiculous. You see this Stonewall Jackson's daring unorthodox division of his smaller force is completely the opposite of what the Union Army is doing, which is always cautious and careful, and they don't want to move too fast. And it's like, you know, the only negative for the Confederates here is in the chaos that occurs after the Confederates win such a astounding victory. People aren't sure where the battle lines settle. And Stonewall Jackson goes out to scout where the enemy is after the attack. And it's at night. And he's out there with like his personal guard. And they accidentally wander into an area that is being patrolled by Southern soldiers. And they don't know that Stonewall Jackson is there. And they open fire on him, thinking that he is a Union patrol trying to figure out where the battle lines are. And Stonewall Jackson is struck in the arm, and he falls off his horse, and he is like seriously wounded. Okay. Stonewall Jackson is shot by his own men in the confusion, basically. And he's taken to a nearby house to try to recover. They amputate the arm, but an infection sets in and he dies. And when Stonewall Jackson dies after the Battle of Chancellorsville, that is a big loss to the Confederacy. Robert E. Lee has lost his best guy, basically. Okay. And so that's going to affect things going forward. It's going to affect Robert E. Lee's decision next. Okay. But again, the Union Army has lost. It's embarrassing. They cannot win in Virginia. They cannot get to Richmond. You know, Joseph Hooker is going to be fired. So it's just a circus in the North, but there's mourning in the South for this loss. Okay. So now we get towards Gettysburg. The next time you hear from me, I'll be teaching about the Battle of Gettysburg. Lee is overconfident. All he does is win, right? All he does is defeat the Union Army. And he's somewhat desperate. His men are hungry. They don't have shoes. They're low, they're low on ammunition. He's lost one of his best generals. And he starts thinking about an invasion of the North. And this is totally against Southern strategy, right? The South's supposed to be on defense. But as far as Lee is concerned, I can beat anything the Union Army throws at me. So I'm going to plan an invasion of Pennsylvania. And I'm going to place my army in such a position in Pennsylvania that it will threaten Washington, D.C. And the Union Army will have to come out and meet me on ground of my choosing. And I will win a great victory and force the North to come to terms and end this war in our favor, in the favor of the South. That's what Lee is thinking. I'm going to invade the North to get them to come out and fight. And after I beat them, they're going to have to sue for peace because people in the North are turning against this war. Lee feels it, and he's, like I said, he's somewhat desperate. And that's going to lead to what will become the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, so to end the class, guys, you can see that I have a journal up here, journal number 7. I'd like you to complete, give you the rest of the period to do that. And next time I see you, we'll talk some Gettysburg. We'll talk some end of the war. Okay, thanks, guys.